Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time, and YouTube drama comes in many different forms. In the last few months, a lot of my videos have focused on these situations that have spanned over years, and although a drama may reach its peak in a way that catches people off guard, if you look at the history, normally you'll see a pattern of conflict and attention from other commentators that has contributed to a climax of sorts. However, drama can often be even more shocking when it happens out of nowhere, when people think that actually a certain channel may be the last place to end up spiraling so dramatically. And that's what appeared to be the case with today's subject, the channel named DanPlan.
Feed him the tea, because obviously he spiked it, so you know what?
Okay, that works too. I don't like tea.
You're Asian, you have to like tea.
I'm gossip free. I hate tea.
Now, when a lot of people reached out to me about this situation, I will admit I was not familiar with DanPlan, and in spite of their approximately 2 million strong fan base, many of my friends were not familiar with their content either. So I sat down and watched a lot of DanPlan and tried to immerse myself in their content. Now I think I have a decent grasp. I will briefly summarize their origins and style, so people have a grip on how they created such a significant following. DanPlan as a channel was established in July 2014 by their titular creators, Daniel and his friend Hosuh, with the first upload coming soon after, delightfully named, by the way, Moral of the Pooping Robber.
And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why is Joe fighting a dude with a weapon? wait, I can do better. Why is Joe fighting a dude with a weapon? But you have to realize that Joe is extremely strong. Even today when he slaps me in the back to say hi in a friendly manner, it feels like this.
This was the first installment of their By the Way series, and this video consisted of a rather crudely drawn character discussing a story told by his youth pastor, in which this pastor encountered a series of burglaries conducted by a robber who defecated following each incident. Now the audio could be a tad better, and this video only appears to include Dan's commentary, but you can definitely see the origins of a great channel in the making. A lot of Hosuh's creative illustrations enhance Dan's stories on a comedic basis, and Dan's outgoing nature makes him an effective storyteller. There was definitely potential here. However, this series wouldn't receive much attention following its initial upload. Animation was in a bit of a lull at that point. Daniel and Hosuh were busy people, and thus it was probably not worth putting too many eggs in that basket. After this, DanPlan spent just under a couple years dedicated to gaming content, which was much more popular at the time. These gaming videos weren't the most unique, though they were often presented more like highlight reels and used character heads to represent different people talking and to try and give it a unique energy. Dan was the consistent host of these videos, gaming with a varying roster of guests such as Anna, Billy, Jay, and of course, Hosuh. However, there was one more character to introduce to the story. That person goes by the name of Steven.
Kill the giant thing.
No, what? Are you stupid?
What? Hey. Oh, that hurts.
You know what really hurts? You know what really hurts? Your stupidity hurts me.
Oh,
okay, that's what really hurts.
Good. Now is the derivative of x squared 3? I can't tell. I haven't been schooling hard.
Steven was introduced on the 5th of September 2015 in the upload Yamate Titan Senpai, in which he and of course Dan and Hosuh play the Attack on Titan tribute game. Like Hosuh and many of their other friends, they were acquainted through school and college, and for these comrades, this was just a regular gaming session which happened to be uploaded onto YouTube. Steven was not one of the original members, but he quickly became a recurring guest on the channel as other individuals began to appear less. However, these gaming videos, although enjoyable for those who participated, didn't set the channel on fire, gaining DanPlan only 50 subscribers. So come May 2016, the By the Way series was resumed, but this time with a slightly different format.
Alright, let me tell you a story about the time when my final exams ended.
Wait. So, why are you telling a story?
In this video, Daniel tries to tell a story, but is occasionally interrupted by his friends, initially requesting justification for the change in direction, and then reacting to his outlandish story regarding the time he discovered a variety of condoms under a person's bed. It was a rough idea of what he had planned for these videos, and over the next few uploads he would continue to refine this brand. In his By the Way Would You Rather, he incorporates his friends, providing them with a more prominent role. In this instance, the friends were Hosuh and Jay, another person who regularly appeared on the channel. By the next video, however, the person appearing alongside Dan and Hosuh was Steven, and he became the principal third contributor to this content. Now, as any creator knows, these videos will not take off immediately, at least most videos won't. However, within the year they had their first hit. By the way, Are You a Psychopath? Now, it's quite easy to work out why this video did well. It's a punchy title, it's a popular topic, and it's a striking thumbnail. And they probably had some pretty impressive watch time too. At this point, animation videos had begun to pick up significant traction, so there was really no better time to blow up. And over the months and years following, they would do just that.
And explains that, alright, Steven, Hosuh, if you press this button, someone, somewhere on this earth, will die.
I press it.
No, not
I press
yet.
it
You
again.
can't press.
I
not
press
done.
it 5 times.
That was not the end
5
of my
times.
statement. Let me finish.
Like their Psychopath video, a lot of their content integrated anecdotal style games, which would often present a challenge and ask the participants to make a decision, which would then lead to various consequences and banter alike. It's engaging to watch and often quite interactive. I would find myself pausing the videos to see if I could work out these questions or mysteries myself. And as their channel grew, their chemistry seemed to develop as well.
You don't see anything. Then when you turn back, there's this disfigured face right in front of you.
Ah, Daniel, how'd you get behind
Punch
me?
it.
It's the old man. It's the old man.
Okay.
Oh, thank
hi,
God.
old
I
man.
do not apologize for punching him.
Thank God, you're just old. Hey, did you say you punched him in the face?
Yeah.
Okay.
If he's gonna show up without making knocking or turning on the lights, he deserves to get punched in the face.
Yeah, the old man is double disfigured from the punch.
Wow.
And thus they established their brand: Daniel, Hosuh, and Steven. By the way, but more importantly, DanPlan. Their content had mass appeal, the topics were timeless, with great rewatch value, and there was a legitimate chemistry that was rooted in a transcendent bond thanks to organic friendships that one cannot simply cultivate for mere business purposes. What could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot.
Hey guys, sorry, but there won't be a stream this week. But I did want to give you guys an explanation about me and DanPlan and just the future of this channel. So as the title of the video says, I've quit DanPlan.
Join me today as we analyze DanPlan, what exactly went down, what exactly people said, what exactly went wrong, and if there's any way to right it. And maybe if I'm feeling a bit charitable, I'll garnish this spicy dish with a few right opinions here and there. I want to also clarify that due to the chronological order of this drama, I'll be going over one side before the other. So if it looks unfavorable towards an individual, sit tight, we'll get there. Without further ado, I suggest we dive right in. As said, the three people central to the DanPlan channel were Daniel, Hosuh, and Steven. Over the years, they established a reputation that was essential to the brand they were creating, as a collective and as individuals. By the way, became a primary brand, and it often became interchangeable with the DanPlan channel for many audience members. Within DanPlan, these characters had their appeal. Dan as the strong anchor for the content and direction of discussion, Hosuh as the precious spirit of innocence, and Steven as the slightly darker, more twisted geezer.
Can I just leave the country?
No leaving the country. That's too
Dang it.
easy. Too
Okay.
easy.
I think I would go to school.
Well, I mean, like, I can up schools too.
No.
It's not just in America, not just in America.
Alright, oh my
I can't
God.
say that in
No,
public,
you
so I
can't
won't
say
take that
this.
out.
That's
Yes.
it's the purge, okay? It's on the purge.
With this in mind, even though the channel was owned by Dan and Hosuh, it gave many viewers the impression it was a mutual venture. There are a couple videos which deviated from the by the way style, and those were probably more restricted to Dan and Hosuh, but as many people tended to conflate the by the way series with the DanPlan channel, it would be easy to receive the impression that they all had a somewhat similar stake. 2019 was an incredibly successful year for the DanPlan squad. They hit 1 million subscribers, they hit 2 million subscribers, they released a ton of merch, launched a Discord server. There was a lot to celebrate. But come 2020, it would all change. On January the 4th, DanPlan released a video called By the Way, Can You Become a Superhero? The video is fairly routine.
Steven, you see into the future. A person's about to get hit by the bus. 3.
The tires of the bus.
The tire of the bus hits. The bus rolls. Like 20 people inside.
Oh
but
God,
the man.
saved! Save the elderly. That was my objective. Saving the elderly. That's all that matters.
Unsuspecting Dan fans didn't notice much. However, the video was ominously labeled Final Episode, and judging by the shock of many people in light of what happened next, gives me the impression that people assumed the subtitle didn't mean the end of DanPlan's series, but more the end of the 2 parts which they had titled in such a way before. However, less than 5 hours later, Steven, a third of By the Way, formally announced in a video that he was going to be departing DanPlan. Now, That's obviously shocking for many reasons. But people leave shows, people leave groups, people move on. That's what you expect. What people didn't expect was the explanation. Normally you have some quaintly written letter thanking people for the good times and the memories. And I'm not doubting that Steven didn't have some of his own, but they were not the focus of this video. He had a greater issue to discuss.
This isn't gonna be a Daniel exposed video, but I did want you all to know about how this all started.
Daniel himself. Let's break the video down. Announcing that he had formally left in mid-December, Steven takes us back to the start and breaks down his role on the channel. I've already explained a fair bit of this, but Steven emphasizes that he was not part of the channel at first, and he only became involved when Hosuh proposed a third member, which became particularly integral when DanPlan transitioned from gaming to more character-driven animation videos.
Our unique theme and on-camera personalities meshed so well, and that's probably why we got so popular so fast. The three of us and our dynamic was just remarkable, and the way we flowed off of each other is still something that amazes me looking back.
Then he talks about their success and how their dynamic concept and delivery all contributed to it. He talks about the scale of the success and his own reaction. Nonetheless, he has never considered it more than a hobby. Him establishing a role in this success and how he has perceived it sets up his next point, which will be the treatment and credit that he has received.
It's no secret that I've never thought of YouTube as anything other than a hobby. Even now with Actually Steven, I still don't consider it a job, but Daniel did, which brings me to this year, and why friends and business don't mix.
This is where the first issue comes in. As a main voice on the channel and someone who was involved in the presentation, he felt proportionally he deserved more than he was receiving from DanPlan. He accepts that he's not quite as involved, but in the month where he states the channel was making 5 figures, he had only received a total of $225. We can assume this occurred around early 2019, as he stated the upcoming instant due to this happened around 9 months prior to him quitting in December. Now, to receive such a meager wage in return felt insulting to him. However, for many, a problem like this between friends wouldn't be publicized unless he had attempted to find a compromise himself. Unfortunately, this attempted resolution led to a very angry 2-day dispute between Daniel and Steven, in which Steven requested a 20% share of the channel. Daniel not only rejected this proposal, but the dispute resulted in what many view as Daniel's most objectionable statement.
So me and Daniel argued for hours over the course of 2 days. But then I asked Daniel, what could I do to increase my share in DanPlan? And everything just imploded. He said nothing, you're just an employee, you have no share. And that statement has stuck with me ever since we fought, and it hasn't gone away.
At this point, Steven proceeds to directly respond to this statement, once again re-emphasizing his contribution and then contrasting it with Daniel's statement to highlight its disrespectful nature. He then proceeds to say at that point he planned on quitting but wanted to stay due to multiple reasons, including Hosuh's attempt to resolve the strained relationships, the fact that Steven enjoyed the fame and attention, but primarily because he wanted to prove himself worthy of having more of a share, more of a position on the channel. However, the more he vied for that approval, the more he came to the realization that it was ultimately unobtainable.
And so, for the past 9 months, I tried. God knows I tried. Every recording session, I brought my humor, my edge to the table. But I fought a losing battle. The more effort I put into developing my character, developing Steven, I realized how little Daniel valued it. Formal Mafia Steven, Huggy Zombie Apocalypse Steven, Hosuh Steven. Daniel didn't give me a script to do those characters, I made them up, and I made my personalities enjoyable. But to Daniel, every recording session, I was merely talking to friends. To him, I wasn't putting in any effort into the videos. Every recording session, I wanted to swear at Daniel for real, to yell at him so much that I had to stop talking sometimes, or else I might say something I would regret the next day. And that feeling only grew each session. Until the last recording in November that we did, where I finally just zoned out and stopped trying at all. 9 months ago, when we argued, I asked Dan how many views on our videos were garnered by me. He said he didn't have an answer. A few weeks ago, I asked him the same question again, and his answer didn't change. So I know that no matter how hard I try, no matter how many personalities I perfect, Daniel will never consider me an equal on the channel. so I quit.
Steven ends with some rather somber messages, stating that people should know their own worth on the channel because Daniel won't recognize it otherwise, and that ultimately he regrets being a part of DanPlan because he still believes he'd call Dan a friend if he'd not involved himself with the channel in the first place. Sad. There are a lot of messages to break down within this video, but we can't say too much currently as there are still many more perspectives to analyze and conflicting points of view. What I will say is that in light of this video, a majority of people believed him, but they weren't necessarily hostile towards Daniel. They more passed on the message that as it stood they were upset with him but would like to hear his side nonetheless. However, before that could happen, there were a few more hammers to fall, and we'll get into that right now. Approximately a week after his video, Steven conducted a 2-hour stream, which obviously made me very happy as it was more material for me to sit through. Thank you, Steven. But jokes aside, there are some key details here, even if you have to sift through a lot of the casual discussion, though I am going to be reserving some details for later discourse. Now, at this point, Daniel had not responded yet, and had not replied to any of Steven's messages seeking resolution, leading to a significant amount of frustration. Steven felt uncertain as to Dan's state, so I decided to proceed with this live stream where he talks more about the conditions surrounding the situation.
Let me preface this entire stream by saying I have reached out to Daniel. I tried to talk to him yesterday just so I can give him some time between getting like all this drama dropped on him and then like him actually wanting to talk to me. So I tried to give him like at least some time. And in that time, I was hoping that he would post something, or at least try to dispel the things I said in my video. But it's just been total silence from him, and I'm not sure what else to do at this point. So I'll just give my side of the story, and if it somehow overlaps with his, feel free to, I guess, disprove them, Daniel.
There's a lot to digest here, and I would obviously recommend watching it yourself if you're truly interested in what he said. A lot of it is relating to feelings that he's had following the video, how he's coping, what he's planning to do when Dan responds, and so on. And a few more personal questions, such as whether he believed YouTube changed Dan, of which you can probably guess Steven's answer. However, there are a few interesting points here. The first one was regarding pay. According to Steven, Hosuh as co-owner was originally being paid on a 50-50 split with Dan. However, at some point in 2017, the split was altered so that Dan received 85% to Hosuh's 15%. Quite the change.
And I don't know if he wants me to say this, but he did, like during our argument, I did find out that Hosuh was being paid 50-50 until some time later when he suddenly went down to 15% rather than 50, not 50, 15%. Daniel took the 85 and then just paid out whoever with like the 100%, which is insane to me. Hosuh probably has reasons for it, but like it was just insane that I heard that. And then I asked him, "Hey Hosuh, how much have you been paid?" And he said 28,000. Okay, so let's assume that 28,000 is 15% of the total revenue, not even just like gross, like the total amount. It's just the amount that Daniel has made. So let's say, okay, so 28,000, 15%, do some multiplication and division. You end up with about $40,000 made in revenue, which is exactly the same as the Social Blade midpoint. The more I dove into it, the more I realized how many more people were being screwed. This is not just a me problem anymore. When I started digging, I started asking the animators, how much were you getting paid? And the answers kept being the same, about $450 per month. For a month of work, they get $450. And it's not even consistent, because sometimes it takes more than a month to make a video, but you still get $450.
Now, Steven states in the description that this comment was actually incorrect, and although he got the details right, he got the maths wrong. Hosuh actually made 42,000 Canadian dollars, which would mean by estimates of the share, Dan would have comparatively made 280,000. He also calls out Dan for paying the animators who work for him $450 a month while on, quote, full-time hours, in spite of the absurd money he was making. Steven uses Social Blade to back up his statements here. We'll hold these thoughts until later.
Like, Daniel has essentially trapped any animator who actually wants to make a living just by paying them like slave wages while still making them work full-time.
One more point relates to the individual by the name of Jay. Now, Jay had appeared on DanPlan's channel multiple times, often alongside Steven. In this video, there is an air of uncertainty about Jay's role. However, one thing that many have observed were the similarities between Jay's and Steven's personalities, leading many to theorize that Dan was planning on replacing Steven with Jay altogether. Steven says he feels that after the confrontation in early 2019, Dan was looking to do just that, as his mannerisms were very popular. However, Steven didn't feel that Jay was a specific replacement, as he believed that no one could truly emulate his style. Steven also discloses that Jay was being paid nothing whatsoever, which was surprising for many considering the numerous appearances that he had made on the channel as well, although he was just a guest.
I knew for a fact that Daniel was trying to replace me after the fight that we had back in March, after the March incident. And I think because of that, it made me see like people around me as my replacements. Do I think Jay was a replacement? No. No one can emulate this greatness, so yeah, I don't think Jay was a replacement for anyone.
However, the specifics were still shrouded in mystery. One thing that seemed prevalent in this case was the lack of evidence. A lot of what we'd heard up to this point was either party testimonies or third-party comments relayed through Steven. This was also probably given that a lot of the anecdotes were based on verbal interactions. And obviously, one doesn't typically think to record calls, it's not really considered kosher. So many people were eagerly awaiting Dan's response. And it was coming. But enter stage left an unexpected guest, Jay himself. Now, Jay had been commenting on the situation from the sidelines. However, on the 17th of January, days before Dan would release his own response, Jay makes his video titled, "Why I Say I'm Not a Part of DanPlan." Now, I'll add the disclaimer that this video is currently private, and we'll discuss that towards the end. But before we indulge in those details, we should probably investigate what the video exactly says. To summarize, it basically does what it says on the tin, with a bit more to boot. He opens it up with the acknowledgement that he's not as invested in it as other parties, but felt an inclination to contribute due to his position. He talks background about his relationship with Dan, why he was restricted in his commitment, stating that everything seemed fine until July 2019, a few months after Dan's confrontation with Steven.
So it's around this time, I guess, so July 2019, that I started to get a hunch or a feeling. I had a hunch that something was off with DanPlan channel internally. So I decided to do a small investigation privately. And when Dan found out about it, that I was digging, he adamantly tried to make me drop it. He did not want me to dig around. And that is when I learned several extremely dangerous issues.
In July 2019, Jay states that he began investigating some of the apparent internal issues of the channel, but when Daniel found out, he became quite agitated and determined to steer attention away from these problems. However, according to Jay, this just led to more problems surfacing. Firstly, that of pay. Jay attests that when initially splitting the channel revenue, Dan split the revenue 50-50 with Hosuh in a purposeful attempt to block out Steven. He states when asking about this, Dan decided to deflect this decision onto various reasoning, which did not appear particularly watertight.
Dan later reasoned that the reason Steven was left out was that Steven was very uncaring about the YouTube project. The example Dan gave to me was that Steven would be on his phone during the recording. I actually confirmed that with Steven, that it only happened twice, and both occurred during a very long recording session lasting 4 hours. One with the Hunger Game and one with the Mafia. And Steven would also not do much in terms of the channel with editing, etc. But I'm pretty sure a lot of you DanPlan followers might know Steven had an incredibly massive influence at this point. Like, he had a massive audience.
He also clears up the changing of these shares, stating Hosuh didn't want any money and wanted it invested back in the channel, yet Daniel continued to pass on a share to Hosuh regardless.
Hosuh specifically told Dan that Hosuh did not want the channel money. Hosuh wanted Dan to use the money to grow the channel. But Dan later essentially pushed the money onto Hosuh for at least 15%. So the DanPlan revenue was split 85 to Dan, 15 to Hosuh. That's just a side note. So Steven, and of course, Steven, 0.
He goes on to talk about the incident where Steven finds out about the money that Dan's making from the channel and goes on to demand 20%. He also says this, which is curious.
So Steven approached Dan about it later, about the monetary issue, and Steven requested 20% of the channel share. Dan might say that it's 33%. That is not true. Steven himself requested 20%.
Something to keep in mind. So during these negotiations, Jay states that Daniel rejected Steven's proposals wholly, obviously referencing the employee quotes. Currently, Jay isn't saying anything particularly revelational in its implications, but 10 minutes in, it becomes a bit more implicative. I suggest we delve into that right now. Now, I don't want to go through this video step by step, because for some people who will be familiar with the video already, that wouldn't be particularly helpful. So what I'm going to talk about is how the video characterizes Dan and which situations Jay uses to back these claims up. The first point that people in the situation thus far attested to is the notion of the lack of empathy on Dan's part, which has led to hurtful things being said. And Jay stays pretty consistent on this basis. He dives into how Daniel views the idea of shares. On the basis of Dan's employee comments, Jay decides to break down exactly why those comments were made and the disparity between Steven and Daniel's perspectives on a person's position in a business.
Steven's not dumb, and to be honest, he's one of probably the smarter people that I met. He knows his self-value, he knows his worth. The critical mistake that Dan makes at this point wasn't just rejecting the share proposal and then gutting it to zero, it's the implications behind that action.
Steven asked for shares because he recognized his own value on the channel. However, Daniel disagreed.
He had a very different unconventional definition for shares. For Dan, a share was something precious that only the originals could get. Also, I just want to make a note that Dan's definition fluctuates greatly. Dan's definition of share doesn't even revolve around money or business-wise. It's just a special title under a special law. Are you an original? No, then you get nothing. That was Dan's mindset. So even if Steven was there when Dan physically made the channel, just by the virtue of Steven not doing enough in Dan's eyes, Steven's original title was withdrawn without even Steven knowing. So when Dan told Steven that he's getting 0%, Dan implicitly told Steven not only that is he worth 0% towards DanPlan, that he's not even a percentage worth towards DanPlan, he pretty much also told him that he's not even viewed as an original. Dan was telling an important asset to his company, DanPlan, who brings an enormous audience and had an immense potential regarding his charisma, humor, that he was just a member, an employee. Dan told Steven that implicitly that he's a disposable unit, easily replaceable one.
On the basis of these differing perspectives, it made Daniel's comments even more insulting, even if they made sense to him at the time. The fact that Steven viewed shares as representative of contribution, and Daniel telling Steven that he was going to be receiving absolutely nothing, gave Steven the impression that Dan viewed his contribution as having no value whatsoever, regardless of how much he was being paid. Jay also outlines that if Steven was there originally, Dan's reasoning that Steven didn't do enough meant that he wouldn't have been valued as a quote original either. Basically, there were a plethora of excuses that Daniel could pull to make sure other associates were locked out of the depository. But why was he locking people out? Well, the second attribute I would use to describe Jay's perspective of Dan is nihilistic, indifferent, and that obviously isn't going to be well received in a community with an emotionally invested audience. Jay claims that Dan doesn't pay his animators well, often paying full-time animators around 450 Canadian dollars a month, which is around 320 American dollars, not really sustainable for a full-time job.
It's a giant sweatshop. Originally there were 3 animators when they just started off, Hosuh included. Now they are at 12 without Hosuh. They get paid an inconsistent $450 Canadian per month at best. And I have seen one example of Dan actually guilt-tripping and haggling animators for their pricing.
Jay does observe that there are part-time animators, but claims that Daniel doesn't really treat them differently or recognize the new ones. He also states that when surveying said animators, a large majority, that being 8 out of 10 of them, weren't happy with the work environment. The morale is low, there's no sense of community, the list goes on, but they say the same thing. Dan is an insecure employer.
Instead of polishing and motivating the current animator team, all he does is just hire non-stop to replace those who leave the team. Because of this, there is minimal difference between the full-time animators and the part-time animators. Another issue that I found within the animation team is that they're no longer a community that they hoped it was. Before, when it was 3 animators, maybe 4, maybe 5 even, including Hosuh, they were a community. They talked to each other, they played games with each other, they enjoyed their time with each other. Now, with 12 on the board, and I think there was more before, that's no longer the case. They're essentially cubicle slaves. I don't see any activity within the server. I don't see them talking to each other, and as far as I can tell, they are just living in their own corner.
In addition to this, Jay talks about the time Daniel asked him to replace Hosuh, given that Hosuh is going away for a couple years.
Hosuh agreed to this willingly. Basically, I was supposed to replace Hosuh. Hosuh has already left to Korea for his mandatory military service for the next 2 years. So, I decided to ask Dan implicitly if I would get shares. The answer was no. I would get nothing. I was pretty much told the same thing as Steven. Even though I was still technically one of the originals, I was there for, I believe, the second video and onward, but I wasn't original enough for Dan.
Daniel once again presented no offer in return before stating that he could receive an hourly recording rate of $20, which once again, considering the money that Jay and Steven stipulate Daniel is making, is a rather laughable sum. How do you explain such behavior? Well, Jay implies really that as the owner and main benefactor of the channel, Dan recognizes that he has the power, and that as the man with the decision-making power, he can make decisions that are unfavorable to everyone else, and they will have to decide whether they like it or leave it. Jay states that Daniel appears to treat the high turnover with a level of detachment, stating that it's just the way it is and that people come and go, so there's no real point in cultivating an overly friendly environment. Dan seems to embrace the consequences. After all, if someone doesn't like the job they're doing, they can just leave, right? That's how jobs work.
But during my investigation, he says this to me, and this is to quote Dan: "People will leave eventually. No one plans on staying at one place forever." And that was his excuse to do nothing about the animation team. Nothing else. If you want to leave, leave. No, I'm not telling you to stay here forever. I'm not going to do anything.
I mean, on principle, yes, but Jay's issue extends to the fact that many people don't have much of an option. They need to find work, and DanPlan is such an established channel that people will work for it without question, which leads to a race to the bottom regarding pay. And it's not that Daniel can't offer more, it's a question of whether he should. But Dan doesn't really seem concerned with that. People come and go, and if they don't like working for him, then they don't need to. It seems that sentiment extended to even cast members like Steven.
I warned Dan about this exact thing happening 5 months ago. On August 10th, 2019, after talking with Steven, Hosuh, and Dan, when I was telling about the investigation, I predicted that Steven would leave DanPlan. And due to certain promises with Dan, I gave Dan a hypothetical. What will you do if someone leaves DanPlan? Let it be me, Hosuh, Steven, or a group of animators, or just a single animator. What will you do? And this was his response. To quote Dan, "I don't care who leaves. This is my channel, and I will run it based on my belief. If it sinks because of that, it sinks."
That leads me to my next point, Jay's implication that Dan is pretty arrogant. It's not just the fact that he's trying to get away with paying people as little as possible because he is allegedly indifferent, but he views himself as the lifeblood of the channel. If he believes that people can come and go at any stage, then he must believe in the power of his own talents, with or without his friends. Everyone else was disposable but him, and if the channel went down, he went down with it. Which brings us to the next point. Determination.
Dan told me that he would support me if I made my own channel so that I can get started there, but I wouldn't get anything from DanPlan, and that I would get reference in his channel, basically publicity or exposure pay. And to quote Dan again, "Go make your own channel. I will support you, give you shoutouts, help you get sponsors, but you will never get a share from DanPlan." For those who might not fully understand what Dan just said, Dan told one of his potentially core members to go make his own company and earn money through that way, and that I would get nothing from DanPlan, and that I won't get anything that I seemingly deserved.
Daniel had a vision of what DanPlan should be. In the conflict regarding pay, Jay states that Dan justified this by comparing it to Vanoss Gaming, a significantly popular creator who posts highlights of him playing games with his friends. But Jay notes that this isn't really fair as the creators at Vanoss all grew from the same position.
For those who may not know Vanoss, he is like 10 plus, I forgot his sub count, but like he is a giant in YouTube community who does a lot of collab work with his online friends. But the difference between Vanoss and DanPlan is that when Vanoss reached out to do collabs, everyone in that channel already had their own channel. Like they were buddies because they were new and they worked together. What Dan was pretty much telling us was, I know you have nothing, go make your own thing and do it that way.
Dan offered to pay Jay in various shoutouts if Jay set up his own channel, but this wasn't what Jay was interested in, and Jay found this suggestion insulting. But that was Dan's idea. He wanted his channel, they could have theirs, his vision would not be compromised. Jay states when he did do some investigating into the problems of the channel and raised the alarm, Dan told Jay to stop interfering because Dan knew what he was doing. Maybe that was arrogance, but it's framed as conscious enough to be assured in its final goal.
But his argument or rebuttal for a lot of things that I said or that I brought up was that he knew what he was doing. He was in this a lot longer and he's aware of it. And basically he's denied or swept a lot of the crucial bits and pieces of the problem right under. And his reply to my investigation was, to quote him, to quote Dan again, Jay, from now on, don't ever interfere or dig around in the inner workings of the channel. It's my channel. What he implied with that was basically, he told me to fuck off when I was trying to help him.
Jay's perspective added a rationale behind the allegations. It gave Daniel's behavior a sense of logic, but not logic that was flattering in any sense at all. It framed him as a person who was aware of the relative power that he held, often using it to very little other than his status, using the concept of free will to absolve wrongdoing. If you don't like it, leave, with the awareness that really no one wanted to upset the apple cart. So now we have the stories, now we have an explanation. However, this was just another perspective, and it wasn't Dan's. But whether Dan was innocent or not, he was the kind of guy to reply. And oh boy, did he. By this point, audience response was very skeptical towards Daniel. These videos painted him treating the channel with a level of nonchalant Darwinism, which harmed numerous friendships in the process. Jay attests that he felt Dan stopped treating him as a friend and only messaged him for business purposes, which seemingly upset him a lot.
I haven't heard Dan reach out to me just for the sake of saying hi. Whenever he did, it was always for content. Let me ask you guys something. Tell me a job or an occupation where you have an hourly rate and is expected to be available upon call for your service or entertainment, with erratic and inconsistent work hours, and that once your service and entertainment value is done, you are shooed away, you're no longer contacted until your next service, when you're next called, and you're just an outsider even after frequent use. Because I'll tell you what I felt like when being told like this. He was pretty much treating me like a call girl, a stripper or a hooker that he can just call on dial on demand. It's actually really hard to damage my pride. I'm not the one to put heavy pride value on the physical being called Jay, but kudos to Dan. He managed to piss me off to a degree to the point of hurting my pride.
These details did not merely harm Daniel's personal image, but they compromised the whole premise of the DanPlan channel pushed by their By The Way series, which was this bunch of friends getting along and having a good time. DanPlan was the sort of channel where people just wanted to imagine that they were supporting good people who were supporting each other. And that was the shock, and that's why people were upset. Videos were uploaded, comments were left, a lot of people had a lot of strong feelings, and yet in spite of that, a lot of these fans wanted to believe in Dan and they did not write him off, which leads us to the 20th of January and Daniel's own response video. And he's gone full black screen, full stop in the title. Ladies and gentlemen, we were in for a ride. Did Daniel save himself? Well, it's complicated. Let me explain. The first 23 minutes were a response to the initial video upload by Steven, and the next 32 were a bit of a sporadic response to Steven's stream. Now, each part has its flaws, but not because I finished thinking it made Daniel a bad person. Actually, I'd argue it humanized his perspective much more. But humanization doesn't necessarily mean justification. There's some good stuff here, there's some not so good stuff here, and it's not going to break itself down, so I suggest we dissect while looking retrospectively at what the other videos presented against him said and seeing how they hold up as well. I will try and get through everything. There's going to be a lot of discussion and a lot of opinions. Straight out the gate, if Daniel wants some simple advice, it would be that he should have combined the receipts of the second part with the structure of the first. It would have made it a lot more effective and impactful. That said, it doesn't mean that we can't do that ourselves and see what it reveals. For example, Dan tends to present the notion that Steven had a tendency to ambush him. He concedes that he had outbursts, even showing an apology that he sent to Steven at the time of the dispute. However, frames it from the perspective that Steven had provoked him into that reaction.
On February 26th of 2019, Steven asked if I could get on a call with him to discuss about our VidCon and Disneyland trip, which made sense to me, so I said yes, because I had to buy him his tickets, and I needed his passport information anyway, so I got on the call. But that was not what he wanted to talk about. When I got on the call, instead of talking about VidCon or Disneyland, him and another associate of his was on the other line. Steven has said that he heard from Hosuh that we were making more money now, so I said yes. But then Steven continued to say with his associate that if he doesn't get 33% of the company and the revenue, that he is going to leave the channel. At the time, I felt betrayed that he held no remorse of leaving, that he had no sympathy for our hard work, and that he suddenly changed his mind about everything that he used to say about YouTube now that we're making more money. Obviously, I was happy to give him more money. We were making more money, so to pay him for his talents is fine, but I was angry at his approach. So we fought. We didn't fight for 1 hour, we didn't fight for a day, we fought for a couple of days. It was back and forth, and we have said a lot of things to each other, which I apologized immediately after I got off the phone. And it wasn't pretty. I don't remember a lot of things we said to each other because it was 11 months ago, but the emotions are all still here.
In a way, this makes sense. Receipts back up that Steven had baited Dan into a call. In a way, it makes sense that he may have made some cruel comments in the heat of the moment. He doesn't seem like an inherently cruel person, and even in the stream, Steven made one comment that always stuck out to me.
He'll either try to go at my money statement or the employee statement that I made, but I know for a fact that he said that, and there's nothing that's going to change my mind.
And I'm often less critical of streams because they're not scripted, they're not organized. You have to take what people say in the moment with a pinch of salt. But the structure of this comment always said to me that he acknowledged that Dan may have been behaving irrationally at that point, regardless of the fact that he said it. And Daniel admits it. It makes sense that maybe he'd be angry at that point. This doesn't make the comment right, but with this situation, it adds up. I can see why that would upset Steven, and I'm not invalidating that. But Dan justifies why he would be upset too. We say cruel things sometimes. However, for a moment, we need to remember that this dispute didn't start in the call. The dispute started before the call because there is a fundamental difference in how these two people view contribution. And that disagreement is once again put under the microscope in Dan's video. And in these parts, he can come across as a bit elitist.
For the rest of that summer, we put all our time and effort into making more videos and running the channel. Hosuh was drawing animations, I was writing scripts, I was editing, and just overall running the channel as a channel. It was a good time. Steven was just still coming on occasionally, recording, and then leaving for weeks or months at a time while we did it, but that was okay too. He said he's doing this for fun, he's just doing this a hobby. He didn't see it as a career, and we were all okay with that. As the channel grew, we started making revenue, actual money. It was insane, and when it happened suddenly, and it was something we never really expected. When we started to make money, I told Steven that we want to pay him. He declined, but I insisted that he at least take something for his time of recording with us, so we mutually decided to pay him $25 an hour for his recording times. This is where the $225 came into play. From September 22nd of 2018 to February 22nd of 2019. Of that 6 months, he worked a total of 9 hours, which was fine. I thought I was compensating something for his time. He was having fun with his friends and getting some cash out of it. I didn't care if he didn't work a lot. He wasn't taking YouTube seriously. And of course, I wanted to compensate him more. So I was going to take him to Disneyland and VidCon, all expenses paid. We're going to have a lot of fun. The fact that he valued his 30 to 40 minutes of recording the same with the amount of sacrifice and effort that Hosuh and I put onto the channel was insulting, and it made me angry.
Now, in principle, I can understand why Daniel would clearly view this input as somewhat limited, and not to the degree that he has committed. But everyone who's involved with the YouTube knows that firstly, a creative job extends beyond recording. And in Steven's video, he vocally calls attention to the characters that he fleshed out and the effort that he put in. He may have recorded for a certain amount of time, but the impact and the thought of these characters exists beyond that.
Formal Mafia Steven, Huggy Zombie Apocalypse Steven, Hosuh Steven. Daniel didn't give me a script to do those characters. I made them up, and I made my personalities enjoyable. But to Daniel, every recording session, I was merely talking to friends. To him, I wasn't putting in any effort into the videos.
On top of this, it's important to remember it's not just about the amount of work one does, but their contribution to the branding and image of the channel. If your face is on the merch, if you're advertised besides the brands, if people come for your quotes in the videos, that's prospective income based on viewership and support. It doesn't matter if that character was fostered in 5 minutes or 5 years, because a majority of financial income for these sorts of channels will come from the audience connection with the character. A characterization that brings people entertainment or hope or anything of the sorts is not something you can base solely on the work behind the scenes, even if it is significantly more difficult than the work in front of the camera or the microphone. The first abject disagreement we encounter, though, is regarding negotiation details. Steven states that in the call he requested a 20% share of income, which is corroborated by Jay. Daniel frames it much more harshly, stating that Steven demanded a third of the income share, or else he was going to walk.
Steven continued to say with his associate that if he doesn't get 33% of the company and the revenue, that he is going to leave the channel.
Now, this point was anticipated in Jay's video, that clip I told you to keep in mind. Some people have used this as a means to invalidate Daniel's point, but anticipating what someone will say does not necessarily mean it's invalid unless you have solid evidence for that assertion, and all Jay stated was that Dan may be confused as someone else proposed it. Now, this may be the mysterious figure that Daniel alluded to, however there is very little detail regarding the identity of this additional person, other than they would need to have been physically with Steven at that point. As we can see, the 7-minute call was between 2 users. Due to Steven's streaming comments, some people have said it was Hosuh, but I think in Steven's video and streams, he was implying that Hosuh had been negotiating following the call rather than in the call.
And I made Hosuh get involved as well. Hosuh, I really am sorry that I made you get involved in my fight, but I'm also really grateful that you did.
What I do find strange is following these aggressive negotiations that they then settled on a still rather underwhelming $100 per video for Steven, which if you consider the alleged income of the channel is still less than 1%.
I insisted that he at least take something for his time of recording with us, so we mutually decided to pay him $25 an hour for his recording times.
Daniel signals that he insisted Steven took $25 per hour of recording prior to these negotiations, despite Steven's apparent refusal at the time, and uses it like he's a generous guy, but then decides not to insist Steven have any more after his apparent aggressive dissatisfaction. It doesn't add up here. And that's not the only thing.
After the March incident, we renegotiated my salary, or rather the amount of pay I was getting. And I remember him saying, "What do you want to get paid now?" I said $100 per video. I didn't say that, but he offered it. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. And then afterwards, he said, "Okay, I hope you know that $100 is a lot of money."
He says that I made him take the $100 per video, and that I guilt-tripped him into taking it, and I forced him to take it. These are untrue. At the end of our fight, when he decided to stay, he then told me that he wants $100 per video. He could have said more. I would have not mind that. That wasn't point of the fight. That was not point of the argument.
When I say I find these details strange, I don't mean I find them strange in the sense that they incriminate Daniel, but it equally doesn't make me think that this is a one-sided affair or that he's blasted these allegations away. Unless Steven planned out how to throw the channel under the bus in a dramatic way 10 months in advance, which there is no evidence of, I have trouble seeing this specific argument as anything else than a couple guys with vastly different perspectives clashing furiously over them, realizing that it wasn't getting them anywhere and coming to some sort of reconciliation with the expectation that for both of their sides, it could improve. But it wasn't a real reconciliation because the initial problem that provoked it was still there. Both sides are just full of interpretations that view the other perspective in unequivocally bad faith. Steven says that Dan claiming something's a lot of money was manipulation when he might just be a stingy person. Dan states that Steven was claiming that Daniel tricked him into taking less money, but Steven never claimed that because he notes that they'd already agreed on a figure. As for who proposed it, who knows? As most of the fans recognized, it was like watching an embarrassing divorce. Daniel's video can be equally as cynical as Steven's. They have highly cynical perspectives on each other's actions. For example, Steven viewed his request of asking what more he can do as a genuine plea to try and earn his place on the channel and a greater share of the business, and Dan's perspective didn't connect with me at all about this.
But when he saw that his initial strategy wasn't working, during our argument, he switched and said, "What can I do to get more percentage?" At that point, I realized that appreciation or more involvement wasn't what he was looking for, but more profit. That's why we fought.
Like you say you considered him a friend at all points, and then say something like that. Like you acknowledge it was a heat-of-the-moment argument, but then make a point which would question his intent regardless in that moment. And it's not like I think Dan is at liberty to give anyone any more of a management role in his channel. From the perspective of management, if that's what he wants to retain, then that is fair. Dan wanted control of the channel. I don't think he's completely arrogant as other videos have portrayed, but I do think he likes to do things his way and he didn't want interference. He wants to be the director, and that's okay. But I think Steven genuinely wanted to justify and solidify his role, but I don't think that Dan had anything to offer. I don't know if Dan's trying to completely shield his image, but an explanation like this would make much more sense than the clumsy account that he provided. I think the main problem here was that there was no real way to justify that someone's character was worth less than 1% of the channel's worth, and by not offering even a share of that, it clearly left a bad taste in Steven's mouth. In his original video, Steven states that he asked a very specific question twice, asking how much his worth is.
9 months ago, when we argued, I asked Dan how many views on our videos were garnered by me. He said he didn't have an answer. A few weeks ago, I asked him the same question again, and his answer didn't change.
And although he left details out of Dan's reply in the DMs, the political, vague nature is highly unsatisfying. Simple as Steven wanted to know his worth, but I don't think Dan either knew or wanted to think about it. This is also why he probably offered to help Steven in the creation of his own channel. This sentiment was echoed in Jay's video, and although Dan didn't get the chance to respond to that one, it was a similar message. He wanted to help grow his friends' own channels and shout them out, even mentioning Vanos Gaming.
I suggested an idea to Steven that we make him a channel of his own, a company that he can run. I did this for a couple of main reasons. One, so that he can have the freedom to create and the business decisions that he wants to make is his own. Two, I wanted him to learn how much effort and time and sacrifice it takes to run a channel. And lastly, I wanted us to have a partnership. Once I realized he wanted to take YouTube seriously, I wanted him to make a channel of his own where we would promote it, where we would try to help it grow, where I would give him and suggest things that help a channel to grow faster, and hopefully develop a relationship like, the Vanos Gaming group or the David Dobrik group. But he declined.
Once again, it just seems like a fundamental disagreement of how they wanted to operate. Not everyone wants their own channel, and it's a very strange philosophy that Daniel has, though I think he genuinely believes it. He wants you to understand the sacrifice. It's daft. And of course, Steven would have been able to understand the work if Daniel had given him a way to earn his share, but Daniel didn't value his intent at that point. If you didn't want someone to expect more from a channel that their face is featured on, you shouldn't have let them on the channel. On top of this, the character dynamic in gaming videos like Vanos is so unbelievably different to the By the Way series that there's no real way to draw a parallel which justifies that point of view. I would argue that with gaming channels, there are many more other in-game factors that can influence the entertainment value of the content and its marketability. And although there are other elements to consider with DanPlan's animated content too, the interplay between the cast is such a significant selling point. It's not the same. I do wonder if Daniel had a legitimate nostalgia for his gaming days and the creative control that it gave him. In spite of all these points, the Way situation does go both ways. Dan stated that it was Steven who offered the $100 rate that they switched to, so the responsibility of that fact has to partly lie on him, providing it's true. But Steven's point after this argument wasn't that he wasn't satisfied with the money, but that no matter how hard he tried, he wasn't recognized. He didn't feel like he was a friend. He wanted to be noticed by Dan. He wanted to be credited by Dan, and he wasn't. He portrays himself as not being obsessed with the money, in fact, rather claiming Dan was.
I don't think he'll milk this. I think he wants this to blow over as soon as possible and get back to business, because that's how he makes money. Views on his videos gets him money. And that's all he cared about when he started the channel. Like, beyond a doubt. Because if he didn't, he wouldn't be taking such shady practices behind the scenes. Doing such shady practices behind the scenes.
Dan does rebut this at one point in response to the stream.
And when Steven quit DanPlan, he's told me that he still wants to be paid for all the videos that will be posted in the future, which I said I would honor. But then on the live stream, he goes on to say,
I didn't want zero recognition, because that's entirely what this was about. Honestly, I didn't care about the money. I still don't care about the money.
Which contradicts what he texted me.
But this is one of the weaker rebuttals again. You don't have to care specifically about the money to still want it for the work you've done, because it could be about what the money represents, a recognition of one's work that they've put in. I don't care about sponsor money that much, but when I do the sponsor, I still expect the payment. For my own personal pride, to know that I'm worth it. If he really cared about the money, I find unlikely that he would have settled for such a proportionally low amount given how much the audience valued him, regardless of Dan's perspective. It's very easy to blow up this drama, and it did blow up, and everyone piled on. But you can't lose sight of what inspired it, the fact that a person just didn't feel like he was part of a family that the audience perceived as existing. That's what you had to combat, and in a way Dan did combat that, but he kind of misses the point again.
If I really thought of him nothing more than an employee, I would have never taken him to VidCon or Disneyland. If I was not friends with him, I wouldn't be friends with him. If I thought that I didn't think of him as a friend, I wouldn't invite him to go camping with me. I wouldn't introduce him to my girlfriend or my family. I wouldn't take him to camping. I wouldn't try to go watch movies with him. I wouldn't invite him to the parties I would only invite my friends over to.
There are no real receipts provided for this. I'll provide benefit of the doubt that they probably happened, because it doesn't change the point. The point was that whatever happened outside of YouTube, it was an insult to Steven how he was treated on the channel. He felt like an employee. He felt perceived as one, and I believe that. I struggle to imagine doing a collaborative channel with a legitimate friend and not having a shares-based agreement. But simply put, I don't think Daniel viewed it as collaborative. I think that no matter what happened in their discussion, no matter how angry they got, the fact that they never came to the agreement that there was a way to share income was the most indicative factor in the failure of their friendship. Because a share is not just worth, it is trust, and there was no trust here. It's claimed that Dan doesn't even share income details with Hosuh, but that is not mentioned. Dan references the trips to Disneyland and VidCon, but Steven himself in the stream that Dan responded to said that he felt the intent wasn't there.
When we went to Disneyland is pretty much when I thought it was getting better. But then I saw Daniel pull out a camera. And then I knew for a fact that he just wanted me to dance. So I danced. And then I knew for a fact that things weren't going to get better.
In the Disneyland video itself uploaded to DanPlan, Steven makes a pretty snide quip that was left in.
Or are you sick?
Sick piece of crap. JK, you paid for something.
That aside, because Dan was quite possessive regarding what he viewed as his own channel, Steven interpreted it as a sense of worth and greater trust. Maybe it was to an extent. I don't know. But I don't think it was necessarily malice on Dan's behalf. I think it was ignorance. And I think that ignorance was willful to an extent.
I forgot to mention at the end of the video because I got a little emotional. But for transparency's sake, I want to say that I have heard whispers of Steven planning to do something along the lines of making a video after he left. So it wasn't 100% surprise when it happened. Nevertheless, the content was still upsetting, and that's why it was still very shocking. I wanted to end the video there. I didn't want to say anything more. That was just my side of the story.
I don't think Dan was that shocked. I think the strains must have been clear, and Dan didn't do enough to avert it because he probably never considered the consequences. And when he did, it was probably too late. But that's not necessarily a one-way street. A lot of public drama on this scale happens because one party decides that actually they don't want to talk it out privately. They want to go nuclear. They want to call someone out. Now, Steven's video isn't your typical call-out post. It doesn't seem tailor-made to be a channel-ending video, but I think its impact spoke volumes to how people viewed him as a part of the channel. However, with the whole future of the channel in jeopardy, was it worth it? And was it the right thing to do? In Daniel's response video, he posts various conversations between himself and Steven. The relevant conversation showed the aftermath of Steven's private departure from the channel. Daniel is very attentive after Steven lists out his personal issues, suggesting twice that they meet up, which is something that Daniel himself references in his response video.
So first things first, before he released that video, I already wanted to talk to him in person. In regards to him leaving, I asked him once after he left to meet up. He said he wanted to do in a call, but we never got in a call. And then later he texted me again and I said, let's please meet up, let's have some coffee. But he declined again.
Daniel knew there was an issue. He wanted to resolve it privately. However, sometimes things shouldn't just be talked about privately. Sometimes we do need to go public with our grievances to make sure that a person is held to account. There are plenty of situations where such a promotion can help other people come forward with their own problems. And plenty of times, a private conversation with a coercive person can help suppress possible consequences facing down a person and postpone the ultimate confrontation and maybe make this person's abuse of power even worse. Sometimes it can be an intimidation tactic, but it's hard to tell with a lot of people. Was going public relevant here, especially in the way that Steven did? Let's talk about it. Well, firstly, I think what we have to discuss is why on earth Steven decided not to talk it out in private. In fact, why he never indicated at all that he planned to make a video, while still talking to Dan at that time. To many people, such behavior would seem pretty snaky, and to be honest, they're not inherently wrong. If we discount the idea that he had malintent, why would he do this? I think the one quote that explains it is here.
So, do I think there was any way to avoid the situation? No. A heavy hand is only moved by a heavier hand.
He viewed it as imperative that he do this, but many would argue, going off Steven and Daniel's videos, that this conflict was clearly avoidable. However, in the streams there are some details which I found quite important, such as this.
After our fight, Hosuh was still talking to Dan about getting money out to other people. To the animators, to me, to everyone else. But Daniel was so stubborn, and he thinks that his wages are okay. They clearly aren't. I will get into the wage issue after, but it was just not, and Hosuh and me were not passive in this.
Now, Daniel doesn't respond to every stream point, and he doesn't have to, but I am surprised he didn't respond to this one. As to me, it's an important detail that could decide whether a situation is avoidable or not.
Also, I want to briefly mention about Hosuh, because Steven talks about Hosuh. Due to the possible legal implications that may come out affecting Hosuh negatively, I'm not going to talk about the transactions and terms we have come to an agreement to. It's something that we both have come to an agreement with. That's all I will say. Him and I are still good. Business-wise, it's something that had to happen. and it's something that really can't be talked about online. It's a private matter, and that's it.
He cites legal ramifications in declining to talk about certain details regarding pay and Hosuh, but I don't think the idea that Hosuh was negotiating on behalf of his friends would fall under that. Now, for argument's sake, I'm going to assume that Steven's perspective is the case, and that Hosuh was indeed attempting to negotiate with Dan, and that Dan rebuffed these negotiations and showed no intention to alter pay. Essentially, at the end of these failed negotiations, Steven receives the impression that there is nothing he can say or do to receive a little more respect. Hosuh was fighting for more pay. That did not occur. They exhausted every option privately. So that's the first half of whether a situation is worth going public about. But what about the second? Well, I think this is the key one, and it may explain why he lied about jumping into a call regarding Disneyland, and why he didn't bring anything up prior to the video, and that is manipulation.
I know what Daniel is like in real life and as a business person. And his business sense makes me very hesitant to actually talk to him again, because I know for a fact that if I put down my defenses, he's gonna try to screw me over again, and I don't want that. So unfortunately, I don't think I can be friends with him anymore.
Steven clearly had the expectation that if he had brought it up with Dan, Dan would be able to talk Steven out of it. This is a problem of perspective, because in Dan's mind, he would have had the opportunity to persuade Steven with his numerous facts and logic. And in Steven's mind, Dan would manipulate him into a position where he doesn't speak up and his story isn't told. Which perspective is true? Well, it really depends on what happened specifically behind the scenes, details that haven't really been admitted or conceded by either side. Steven speculated and Daniel dodged, neither of which are conclusive. I guess it made sense in Steven's head what he was doing, and like Daniel, he probably didn't consider all the consequences of not confronting it and diving headfirst in the video. And it's hard to say that what's happened to Daniel specifically and DanPlan is completely justified.
After Daniel posts his video, I want to sit down with him and actually talk things out. I do truly want to resolve this, because there are still people working on DanPlan who are being mistreated, and I don't want that to happen to them. So yeah, I want to resolve this. Not for my sake, because I honestly don't want his money anymore.
He does seem quite torn on his own feelings regarding Daniel, and he may well have been questioning whether he did the right thing. It's a good question. Was undermining the image of a friend and his channel wants to even help build a justified response to the perception of an injustice perpetrated by a colleague, one that did not seem like it was going to resolve itself otherwise? Maybe not, but what would the middle ground have been? I think that's the question for discussion today. It's just a shame that Steven did have such a cynical perception of Dan, to believe that every message with a smiley face, every trip posted onto YouTube had some ulterior motive. This wasn't helped when Jay said in his video that he felt like Dan only messaged him when he had something to gain. It brings into question all the niceties. Being nice doesn't make you a good person, and some people can be awfully friendly while twisting the knife in other aspects. And that's how Steven saw Daniel, a shining smile with teeth of daggers, and Steven decided to take it down. By doing this, Steven also broke a prospective agreement that he made with Dan, which was to wait out his position until Hosuh had left the channel. This was detailed in Daniel's video again.
Nevertheless, I still compensate Steven for each video that he's in. And that was the agreement that we made. My side of the agreement was that we try and get past this. And on top of that, that because Hosuh is leaving for military, and we both knew at the time, I wanted the channel and the community to be still the same when he came back. So I wanted Steven to stay at least until then, and we can figure something out from there on. Even the day when he left the channel, December 15th or 16th, I supported him. I told him that it was upsetting that he was leaving, and that even though he is breaking his end of the deal, I won't break my end of the deal, and that I want us to transition through this smoothly, and I want him to succeed in his own pursuits and in his chapter and in his channel.
Now, I must say I find it strange that moving past an argument would be included in a deal. Feelings like that cannot really be defined by the fabric as such. I feel that Dan wanted to move on so badly, and he just didn't know what else to do but put it in a pact. I can understand why Steven not following through on this may be cause for critique. However, more on the side that he made the deal in the first place after such a volatile argument, one that both sides frame as extremely involved. Now, I would also add that in the DMs shown by Daniel himself, Steven seems to contest that this deal was ever made, which gives me the impression that it wasn't particularly formal. But let's entertain the idea that this deal is a thing for argument's sake. Binding deals are a bad idea unless you both have a similar level of influence in that deal, or else one's always going to feel at risk of being taken advantage of. Now, you might make a deal like that as a friend, but as Steven no longer viewed Dan as a friend when he broke the deal, he therefore had no reason to commit to it. Deals like those are to be made between equals, and Steven no longer felt like an equal, so he had no reason to honor it. Why he made the deal in the first place? I don't know. Maybe he felt bad. Maybe it was for Hosuh. They clearly have a close bond. But whatever it was buried 6 feet deep by January.
And even during the first video, which was carefully written and planned and edited.
Now, just with the leaving video, I spent literally a month on it. Because, okay, so my first early draft of my script, okay, so it was scripted.
He doesn't mention anything about not attacking me, but then posts a community tab later saying, oh yeah, don't attack Daniel.
Consequences were more severe than most would have anticipated, and his mixed feelings did lead to him often swinging back and forth about how he feels regarding the outcome. Daniel picks these out and criticizes him quite harshly.
He mentions at the beginning of his live stream, don't attack Dan. I appreciate that. I honestly do. But the statement that he makes isn't consistent with what he goes on to say, where he says he's using you guys as a weapon, even though he doesn't want to.
Because Dan didn't give me recognition for 1 mil, so I'm gonna take away his 2 mil, and I find that pretty hilarious. Of course, I am using you guys as a weapon then, so if you want to unsubscribe, by all means go ahead. If you want to keep being subscribed, by all means go ahead.
Or to unsubscribe if they feel like it.
However, Daniel's clip of the stream does omit Steven's then sudden pivot back to reasonability and recognition that this would be a bad idea.
If you want to unsubscribe, by all means go ahead. If you want to keep being subscribed, by all means go ahead. I don't want to use you guys as a weapon. That's so cowardly on my part. So I would never say do or don't do something.
As said, streaming brings out a spontaneity of people that can be fundamentally emotional and bitter, and this is clearly an emotional topic. You have to take that into consideration when making your arguments, but unfortunately, both of these people didn't see the intent in the other side. This was a personal battle that Steven fought, but by the stream and Jay's video, it became a greater question about another oppressed minority. And I'm not talking about gamers. Who was it then? To an extent, both parties could have been more proactive. But as the guy in charge of the channel, Daniel did make a real mistake by treating someone who is part of the brand as a part-time rep, financially or personally.
Now, this doesn't mean I'm not frugal. I grew up poor. I am a cheap person just because of the way I was raised. I am not insensitive to finances just because I'm now dealing with a larger sum of money. Each transaction I'm very careful with. And I am very cautious in making those transactions.
Now, in his response video, Daniel does admit he has a tendency to be cheap, and I think that's fine. It's good that he's being open about it. Some openness will hopefully harbor improvement in the future. However, he does dedicate a significant proportion of the video to the animators.
The animators and just crew in general, I feel super bad for dragging them into this. Because in my head, one of the scenarios that could play out is literally him just burning the entire channel to the ground, letting it die, and then leaving all the animators and like crew in general to do nothing, because this is a job for them.
First and foremost, I've already apologized to them privately, but I want to apologize again. I am sorry that all of you are caught up in this. It's not your problem that Steven and I had a spat. And it's not your problem that we are taking this out in publicly. You should not be involved in this. I know it's not just stress for me, but for you all as well. And I am so sorry that you're involved in this.
Now, the animators are a pretty sacred talking point. They're this mystical third party who neither side can necessarily lay claim to, so each faction definitely panders to the narrative that works best for them, while leaving out a few relevant details. Now, animators are not at the forefront of the channel, but they do provide a significant contribution, and it is accepted that they would be paid for such a contribution. After Steven's video, there were rumblings about the status of animators and if they'd experienced a similar side of Daniel's behavior, be that his treatment of them or his payment.
The more I dove into it, the more I realized how many more people were being screwed. This is not just a me problem anymore. When I started digging, I started asking the animators, how much were you getting paid? And the answers kept being the same, about $450 per month. For a month of work, they get $450. And it's not even consistent, because sometimes it takes more than a month to make a video, but you still get $450. $450, let's say $450 just to be generous, for a month's work. That is insane. If my boss was paying me $450 for working full-time, I'd quit the job.
The word full-time was thrown around a lot. Part-time was mentioned too, but the main allegations came from how he treated his, quote, full-time animators.
What it means to work for a company full-time is that you are implying that I will work for you for this amount of set of hours consistently, and I am trusting this company to give me financial stability of my work. So basically, I will ensure that I give you my full time of work, and in return, I want a consistent, safe, monetary reciprocation. I give you work, you give me money. That is not the case. There is very, very, very little difference between part-time animators and full-time animators. The full-time maybe get paid a little bit more, who knows? But as far as I can tell, it's still inconsistent, it's still grossly underpaid, and there's almost no benefits.
Daniel has essentially trapped any animator who actually wants to make a living just by paying them like slave wages while still making them work full-time.
Now, full-time is quite a loaded word in Western society. It generally refers to a person who works a set amount of hours and obtains their primary source of income from that job. The figure that was also thrown around was $450 a month, although they state that payment was inconsistent as a ballpark figure for a full-time job. Anyone would tell you that is unacceptable, and if DanPlan was doing that, then he should be called out. However, he contests this immediately and shows receipts to back it up.
I don't make them sign anything. And if I were to have hired them full time, make them sign something where they can't get out, and then not pay them properly, that's illegal. First of all, they don't sign anything. It's a verbal agreement, and it's, second of all, not a full-time employment. No one has mentioned this, and I don't know why. They are what it's called subcontractors. They are contractors. That is what the type of job that they have. They do a contracted job for a project. In this case, it's a video. And it's completely different from a wage-based job. They do their own work as their own entity. And on the project that we request, we both agree on a price. When we mutually agree on the price, they then work on the video itself. People keep on bringing up full-time or part-time or whatever. It just doesn't make any sense. And that is not the type of agreement that I have with the animators. If I were to hire somebody in a different manner, that would be a different story. But this isn't that case. When I interview them, I always ask how much they want to be paid per video. And Steven says that they come into this job without knowing anything.
Now, subcontractual work is completely different because you're paying for the completion of a job. You don't know how many hours they're working or how consistently they're working. You have a job, you have a deadline, and you hope it's done in time. I must admit, I find it strange that as a person providing a recurrent job on a regular basis, he doesn't have a set price in his head and asks animators what they want to be paid. Daniel is an established creator with a lot of influence, and an animator who will want to be hired for future jobs may lower their prices for competitiveness. If it was a one-off job or a field that he was inexperienced in, it would make more sense.
And I thought that if they weren't happy with it, they could always talk to me because I was approachable to them. It doesn't excuse the fact that I am in the position that I'm in, which means that since I am the boss or a YouTuber, that because of who I am and the relationship that I have with them and the business point of view, that it is harder to approach me no matter what I do. And if that is what the audience felt, and if that's what the animators felt, I sincerely apologize. I am sorry.
Now, Dan does admit that he made a mistake by not being more proactive in the video. I do appreciate that. And there are many subcontractors who do have their own pre-established prices. However, it's hard to apply that without a clear amount of work for a video established. Nonetheless, it is just a side point, and I will digress. Does this mean he was paying good price? Not really. I'm not an animator myself. I did briefly speak to an animator involved who felt that given the work per frame and the consideration that the animator storyboarded the videos to, this payment was not sufficient in comparison to the other work they have been doing since DanPlan. It also depends on the amount of negotiation that occurred prior, and as went over earlier, we're not really receiving a clear narrative on that front. On top of this, in Jay's video, he also references Hosuh, who is an animator himself, and his opinion on how much the animators should be paid.
This is coming from Hosuh directly. In Hosuh's opinion, the videos created by the animators are worth at least $1,500 Canadian per video.
Now, this is not coming from Hosuh directly, but Hosuh hasn't challenged it either, and has since worked with Jay. That doesn't exactly prove he said it, but it's another relevant nugget of information to consider regardless. Unfortunately, in this situation, the receipts were rather low. Some question whether the animators could have gone on strike, but unfortunately, if they viewed their roles expendable given the high turnover of staff, then Dan could have just sacked them. If they weren't really that much of a community, then it would have been even harder to organize. Of course, this begs the question of why this was not raised more when Hosuh was supposedly negotiating or Jay investigating. Well, probably because no party wanted to initiate civil war with the hope that it would improve, but problems seldom disappear without confrontation, or else the person will be ignorant. And although I think Dan was willfully ignorant to an extent, I think the animator issue here was probably a collateral outcome of the drama which could have been avoided in hindsight. There are also claims after Daniel's video that he had cherry-picked examples that supported his case, and this may be somewhat true, but unfortunately there's not too much that can be done at this point. You need evidence of the contrary, simple as.
It's not fair to the animators that are coming on with zero knowledge and essentially being put into an assembly line factory.
Again, how would he know? He hasn't joined in a single interview. What I do during the interview, Steven has never been part of, so for him to just assume that they don't know anything when they come in is a lie. I explain in full detail what they will be doing. I tell them that this isn't an easy job. I tell them that it may take a long time. I tell them that the type of employment is a subcontractor work, which means I pay them for the video, not for the amount of time. Contractor job is a real thing, and anyone that knows business would know what I'm talking about. I obviously don't know a lot of different sides of different businesses, but it's one of the things that you're allowed to do when you want to hire somebody for a job. Now, the pay also depends on the length of the video, the amount of videos that we have subcontracted out to, and the quality of the project, because afterwards I try to tip them more than what we pre-agreed on. If they weren't happy with the pay, they can talk to me. Because there has been times where, we would discuss, me and an animator, hey, do you think this is good enough? And they tell me, I don't know, do you think it's good enough? And we come to an agreement. And if they aren't happy with it, we can meet somewhere in the middle.
Although Daniel claimed that there was no way that Steven would know such details listed in the live stream as incriminating, as we know, Jay, on the other hand, claimed to have sat in interviews regarding prospective animators with Dan and made some pretty strong claims himself, likely the ones that may have been repeated in Steven's streams. Steven's comments are likely a case of fired-up individuals and Chinese whispers. I think it probably is an exaggerated image, but that's what happens when you try and tackle a subject that you feel strongly about on stream based on other people's comments.
Again, I can't show texts or messages, but trust me when I say that I have tried always my best to be considerate to the animators. I've always tried to be kind and gentle and compassionate about their personal lives, and not only that, but be understanding if they're delayed. Doesn't mean I was never frustrated. anyone who works with anyone are sometimes frustrated, but I tried my best to care for them first before I care about this business or posting a video. When I ask them and they ignore me, I even continue to say and worry about their well-being before the video itself. I ask them how they're doing first before I continue and ask about how the videos are coming along. The only time I would have a conversation about if they're too delayed or if there's something wrong is if there is something seriously wrong or they're months and months late and I have to have a conversation just to see if everything's okay. And even then, it's not an aggressive call. I just ask how they're doing. And that I understand that personal lives do interfere with finishing on deadlines. This is not because I'm like a great person. It's because I just know what it's like to be on the other side of a relationship when it comes to like a boss figure, I guess. And I didn't want to be one of those people that yelled or intimidated their coworkers or their the people they worked with. I at least think, to the best of my knowledge, tried to be kind and gentle with the animators.
There are two dramatically different perspectives here, but they're not completely incompatible. Although they are somewhat. Dan may have been a lovely person to talk to, may have checked in with people about how they were doing, may have been accepting when they were late. That doesn't mean he pays them well, nor does it mean they weren't afraid to speak out due to the possibility of their pay being affected. Admittedly, now the channel has been declared deceased by various people, there isn't really much at stake, so that point is kind of moot. But for the animators who did speak up, what did they actually say? Well, once again, it becomes quite complicated. There was a YouTuber named Snazzle, who was quite a vocal critic of Daniel, calling him out left, right, and center for his behavior.
What are you doing, Dan? What are you doing, man? This is disgusting. Please come out and say something. Please apologize. Please let people know you can change at least a little, please. There has to be some humanity in you. This can't happen. You have to see now that this is wrong. There has to be some fundamental click going on in your mind that says, hey, this is wrong. I'm doing something wrong. Everyone's telling me I'm doing something wrong, but I'm not seeing it. Why am I not seeing it? Why can't I not see it? Where is that at, Dan? Where's the click? I don't get it from you. None of this makes any sense. How could you be at this right now? How could this level of incompetency happen? How could you be so impudent as to not pay for your staff to get what they need? Those people care so much about your channel, obviously more than you do, and you take all the credit, all the money. That is insane!
After Steven streamed and Jay spoke about this narrative, the animator point became more prominent, and Snazzle became more involved. He posted this on Discord, claiming to have spoken to the animators, and it had moved him to the point of tears. Sobering stuff. So what did he do? Well, Snazzle conducted a charity livestream, raising over $4,000 for these animators. A couple of these animators were involved themselves, though I don't think they spoke about the specific drama. I feel if they did, the clips would have been used elsewhere, even though the stream is no longer accessible. Regardless, this was an extraordinary success for the animators and their advocates, but there was more to come. And when I say that, I mean, well, Daniel's video. Dan obviously disputed these claims, showed corresponding evidence, and although he didn't directly respond to the claims made by Snazzle and Jay, his story generally contradicted the image that his treatment of the animators would bring a tear to one's eye. So some became quite confused and asked questions about the original claims against Daniel. What were the responses? Well,
as much as I want to explain the situation to people, as much as I know how much, how much people want the information, the information that I have, I just can't do it. I can't sit here and justify giving out that when I know how many people will be hurt just because I do that.
This was frustrating, and it left a lot of people with unanswered questions. Dan's response wasn't the best. There were clear logical flaws, statements that conveyed a rather self-righteous sentiment, arguments that were too irrelevant, and details left out. But after the video, there were very few responses too, and those that were uploaded were very inconclusive. Lest it be reminded, Dan was the only person to provide actual evidence, and that evidence may not have definitively disproved all the narratives against him, but it was enough in certain terms.
I know so many things that after watching Dan's response video that I could claim. I know for fact that I could dispute everything or most everything he says. Especially the last bit of the end with the animators. After having spoken to all of the animators for the charity event, I know everything that happened with the situation. I know everything from the accounts of the 8 animators I spoke to. I know what the truth is. But that's what makes this so hard for me.
After some ran such a strong narrative on the basis of the animators and raising thousands of dollars for them, people wanted to feel like this narrative was actually justified, and the fact that people decided to hold back was understandably frustrating.
And I'm sorry that that's the case, because there's a lot here, there's so much here that is just insane, but whether or not Dan's lying, whether or not Steven's lying, no matter who's lying or what's the circumstance, it's a bad situation for everyone involved. And I want to walk away with what I have.
Some people compared this response to Jeffree Star, and I understand why. It was the sudden decision to end the drama immediately after a conflicting viewpoint and evidence came out, and framing it as the right thing to do. People never like that. It seems disingenuous. They also don't like being told when it's time to stop the discussion. They'll decide when to stop being interested in it. Thank you very much. Snazzle did state he was doing it for the animators, and I do not doubt that many of them probably did want the drama to end. But it's likely worth considering that a bit earlier on in the situation when you're dogmatically preaching over your microphone. I also don't want to dispute that there's a real moralistic case for the disclosure of more information and justification of the money raised off people who assume the premise to be true, and the handling is definitely subpar. But it is what it is. They raised a lot of money following the end of By the Way, and they did say they would be working with the animators to find them new work. Not that the animators need that. However, I'd be lying if I said the situation didn't leave a bitter taste in my mouth given the strength and passion prior. I just hope some people take it as a learning experience going forward.
Daniel has essentially trapped any animator who actually wants to make a living just by paying them like slave wages while still making them work full-time.
If this was true, I need to be sued. This is not true, and the fact that he said this is a defamation towards not just me, but the company.
Now, Daniel does sound a bit silly when he talks about defamation against the company, but equally these strong sentiments are why people have probably interpreted it with a bit more of an open mind. If Daniel was straight up lying about details, it seems possible to audience members that someone probably would have at least provided factual evidence to the contrary. Now, you can 100% believe the idea that there may be some reasons that these people don't want the drama. These people are not the same as Jeffree Star and the likes who thrive off it. In the words of Steven,
do I plan on posting another reply video afterwards? No. Once I know that Daniel has seen my stuff, I want to talk to him privately. We're not gonna do that like avocado person.
What do I think? I think it's fair to say the main individuals involved probably didn't want this huge conflict. Steven wanted to be recognized, Daniel had a reason to reply. Both felt inclined to make public statements for what they believed was just. And although, as noted, certain comments were probably overkill, it's what cynicism does to people. What about other people's motives? Well, I'm not so sure. Jay was another character who had a right to comment in what definitely formed a case against Daniel, and the animator issue was one of the blind spots where Daniel didn't provide any screenshots other than regarding pay. As I noted earlier, the fact that he had no DMs to show whatsoever was pretty unconvincing. On top of this, Jay claimed he had DMs of his own to release, as he felt his credibility was challenged. Again, these DMs never saw the light of day. Whether the animators urged him not to, as he says in DMs, or if the DMs never existed, is something you'll have to decide for both sides. I personally feel that because it was the case for both sides, probably meant there was an element of animator reservation. And sometimes silence can be equally as telling as speaking up. People were probably conflicted about their feelings regarding Daniel. Was he nice for the right reasons, or was he just massaging the product? Was he intimidating, or were they intimidated? I doubt you'd see Dan going around spontaneously abusing people, so I assume the evidence was a bit more subtle and maybe people had cold feet about that. As mentioned, I had also spoken to an animator involved, and that was the impression that I received too. A lot of conflicted feelings in spite of criticism. Steven stuck by his guns following the video, though also sticking by his word that he doesn't seek to make another. He's posted a few more statements here and there that have been pretty consistent, many about the point regarding animators and obviously why he wanted to speak about it. It seems that any of Steven's conflicted feelings prior to Dan's video have gone out the window, which I think has disappointed fans further. But in a situation like this, there's no point in faking something that doesn't exist. Jay's video was since removed, and Jay has since deleted his presence from the internet, presumably because of certain allegations surrounding various inappropriate sexual behavior, including grooming, which I just want to escape at this point. He did post a response, denying these fairly vehemently though. As most of the screenshots and the document that held them are now gone, it's hard for me to really provide a balanced opinion. As a minor caveat, I did find one of the documents. I'm still kind of confused. Jay's been up to some camaraderie, but I'm not sure if it's as incriminating as implied. Regardless, I'll leave them in the reference document in case anyone wants to try and make sense of them. I won't add too much more, other than his exit doesn't appear to have been motivated by the DanPlan situation specifically. Does this compromise his credibility? Not necessarily, unless you feel there's an element of deceit or similar traits in his behavior which may be transferable. As such, it's hard to comment. Jay's side was just perspective, and although it was important, there are other more important points to take away. When we reflect on DanPlan, there is a significant lack of evidence that answers people's questions. A lot of questions about people's characters and so on, especially the accusations. For example, is Daniel manipulative? Maybe. These DMs that he posted in his own video do seem strangely worded. Amongst other things, one statement that always stuck out to me said, "I treated you so much better." This one always rubbed me the wrong way, because who the hell says that if they're not trying to manipulate you? Of course, that's not an argument of positivity. He may just hold himself in high regard and it would be kind of transparent, and thus it's not conclusive. But it's a really weird thing to say to someone, even someone whom you have treated well. A lot of other comments, I can see why they would be manipulative, but I can also see why they may not be. You have to ask yourself, could a rational person reply this way? For a lot of the comments, my answer was yes. So you can't jump to the conclusion that someone is malicious just because they say something that could be manipulative. It's true that Daniel could just say certain things in an attempt to butter others up to stop them from speaking out if he knows they might make a video, but it's also something he might say if he genuinely wants to remain friends. It's about how you know Daniel, and I don't know him well enough to make that judgment, though I will provide my opinion very soon. Other questions about contradictions, such as Steven saying there's a long negotiation phase and Daniel framing it as if he just came back and accepted $100 per video, seem inconclusive. Some DMs show that Dan was nice to Steven at points, but what that niceness represents, we cannot be sure. Was Steven's video the only option? Was other people's treatment at stake? And was it worth it? The truth is, you can't really answer these questions with what we've been given, but I do think there are some things you can take from the situation. One of the more unfair statements that Daniel made in his video was this one.
Steven says that he's worried that they'll be jobless from this. If he really thought this, he would not have made that video when he did. Because when he quit, we had a conversation. And in the conversation, I told him that there's a lot of videos in progress that he is in, and that we're in the progress of making them. So I will be announcing that he is leaving after those videos are posted. This was for the sake of the animators that are working hard to make these videos complete. And he understood that it might take a while. But regardless, he made a video 2 weeks after he quit. And so now we can't post the videos that he is in. They were all still working in progress. And now they will never see the light of day because of the actions that he took. Of course, I'll be paying the animators full amount that we pre-agreed on, even if they didn't finish the video. It's not their fault we can't post these videos, and I still want to compensate them with the agreed amount that we made, and I'll ask them if the amount is okay again. And if they're not, then we'll meet somewhere. But that's not the important part. The important part is that what they made will never see the light of day because Steven decided to make the video so quickly, even though he knew we were still in progress of making many videos that he was in.
Now, this is pretty unreasonable considering Steven stated that he doesn't mind any videos with him in being published after his exit. Although I understand why you may not want to release previous videos with someone you have bad blood with, that is ultimately your decision as much as his was to release the video. It's a shared responsibility. Daniel also does a fair bit of paraphrasing here, and if you look at the DMs, all it really shows is Steven saying he wants the videos out as soon as possible rather than having them spaced out, even though he also says he's okay with them being published. I think Steven made his point pretty clear in the messages, and Daniel's interpretation is rather uncharitable. The tone it's done in is pretty incendiary, and it seems like he's looking for an excuse to end the series there. This didn't have to be the series ending video. Dan chose to make this video series ending. It wouldn't have been difficult to make a video saying, I'm sorry, I got some things wrong, I probably did underestimate the efforts of those around me, but I do feel that people have got my intent wrong and I'm gonna do better to prove it. The DanPlan audience would have been more than happy with a video like that. They wanted this situation to heal. Dan chose to kamikaze it by making an equal amount of character indicting statements against Steven. Does that mean he's guilty? Not at all. He may just be defending his pride. But pride comes at a cost, and Dan decides to pay the price. And hell, he can probably afford it. The amount of money that an audience-friendly animation channel will make from ad revenue alone is monumental. And then you consider merch and sponsorships, it'll be ridiculous. On the other hand, YouTube can be unpredictable, and having all your eggs in that basket would probably make you a bit more frugal than some careers would. I understand that, and I wanted to empathize with him on the basis of the fact that running a team, costing, and being consistent can be a challenge, but at the same time, his self-superior attitude towards it as if it's some monumental undertaking that suddenly entitles him to such a mammoth share of the channel is something that I couldn't personally connect with. It doesn't help that one of the other allegations was that he paid some of the manual work a surprisingly low amount. It was contradictory logic to many people.
It's not true. Ever since the company was made at the beginning of last year, I have taken $0 from the company. This doesn't mean I haven't taken money from the past, before the company was made. Doesn't mean I won't take money out from the company in the future. But I was more invested in reinvesting into the channel and the community, and I was more focused on putting the money there. But clearly, seems like now that I just take all the money and run away with it.
Besides the rather pointless nature of that statement, it doesn't change the fact that how much he paid himself wasn't the problem. He could donate it all to charity, and it wouldn't change the point. It's proportionately how much was made and how much other people who contributed a significant amount to the channel brand saw. Now, regardless of how ridiculous I would consider it, I mean, $100 a video for someone in that position is unbelievable. If both parties agree to it, force aside, most people will say that's a responsibility taken on by both sides. So obviously there is the question regarding how much negotiation took place, and there's very little evidence shown. But regardless of the claims, it makes sense to me that Steven probably ended up settling for less due to a motive outside of that which is financial. Daniel is very careful in each of his statements, and I don't doubt that he probably has negotiated with artists from time to time and come to an agreement, but it doesn't seem implausible that Hosuh may have argued generally with Daniel regarding payments and wages too, and I find the use of legality as a reason not to discuss such to be rather unconvincing. I do receive the impression that Daniel is quite headstrong, and I think the fact that he never really recognized the sheer imbalance in that pay is a testament to it. If you consider someone more than an employee, then pay them like one. He was essentially a contracted guest, and that gave him no loyalty. Daniel was motivated to keep the channel structured as it was. I think he did have a bias towards people he viewed as quote originals, especially if he gave Hosuh a cut against the dude's own will. He was stubborn, and I wouldn't doubt that when confronted, he used the power of his authority to appeal to his sense of business and knowing what's best, which is where this shout-out Thanos style idea came from, maybe from the good old gaming days. I don't think Dan uses these ideas to insult people as Jay felt. I received the impression it was likely a legitimate passion that he had tunnel vision about. I don't think Dan had menacing intentions, he just thought he knew what was best because he was the channel owner. And the channel was his, but he failed to realize that the By the Way series brought Steven into the picture, and no amount of side videos, almost all of which underperformed, could really change that. Steven isn't business-minded. I think he just wanted some more credit, in whatever form. Now, there are nuances to this dispute, given it was rooted in a confrontation that both sides framed quite differently, and we know it was a volatile argument and we can say things in the heat of the moment. Daniel did apologize for his rage very shortly after it, but the resolution was clearly not the end. No deal can help you move past something like that. Daniel may have viewed his outburst as a moment of frustration, but Steven saw it as the slipping of a long war masquerade, comments that remained stuck in his head for months to come. By the time he left the channel, he had grown bitter, to the extent that he wanted to make Daniel pay. He wanted to be heard, and he clearly didn't think he could be heard from the inside. Should he have brought it up with Daniel prior? Maybe if he cared about Daniel knowing, but at that point he didn't. Steven wanted first blood, and he got it.
Do I think me and Dan will be friends? Do I have any intentions on being friends again? No. I burned this bridge and I don't intend to rebuild it.
Now at this point, Steven can't really put on the I reached out to Daniel narrative because he can't expect to be treated any differently to how he treated Daniel. There's no honor amongst thieves. But before we could even have that discussion, Jay's video left a further dent in the already tarnished reputation. It fit in thematically with Steven's narrative and provided even more detail, some of which would be confirmed by Dan's own video a few days later, some of which would be contradicted. Dan's video may have originally been an emotional tell-all of one side, but by the time the second stream came out, it became a case of who was going to scorch the most earth. Daniel's video may have rationalized his perspective, but there was little closure. Even with the evidence and screenshots, you received the impression that these two cowboys were riding on different wavelengths, and you may find yourself on either. If you are more of a classical liberal, you may well have sided with Dan. To some people, I'm sure Dan's deals were just business. Whether he was a dick to people or not, people consented and he was part of the market, even if the market was flawed. Yet you could be the most Machiavellian mortal in existence and still acknowledge that Dan ultimately failed because he torpedoed his own flagship series in the name of pride. The image of DanPlan was based on something inherently antithetical to how the drama portrayed it. A channel always will have some underlying business elements, but if fraternity is a selling point, then these videos were just not compatible with it. Dan recently revamped the channel to pursue a new direction, one that I think he is more comfortable with and will probably reflect his interests a little more. I wish him the best with that, and maybe he did truly see opportunity within the destruction. But as many other creators have found, it is often hard to rebrand with an audience who have come to expect something. So I would manage expectations over the coming months and focus on making content that you enjoy, regardless of what other people say. Don't go out of your way to justify yourself.
I'm at a state where I have to explain myself for wanting to charity because I'm so worried that people are just going to be like, oh, anything he does now, he's just doing it for his... No, I've been doing charity before this drama happened, and I will continue to do charity after this drama happened. I don't care what you think of me, all right? This doesn't fix anything. If I was a bad person, I am a bad person. If I was a good person, I am a good person. Doing a charity is only good because you're doing a charity. Everybody should be doing charity. If you can't afford it, don't donate. Okay, you should protect yourself first, obviously. But if you can afford it, help each other out.
Two sides hell-bent on burning each other down. What were we left with? Well, the neutral parties, and they told their own story too. We already spoke about the Animators, who are mostly silent and reticent about releasing any DMs which support either cause. But what about the friends, the amigos? What have they said? Well, one of the original members by the name of Anna released a stream stating her perspective. I'd say it leans towards Dan's side, and of course, there is a limit within that perspective. She definitely sides towards his corner. If my video doesn't satisfy on its own, I'd recommend checking hers out.
I think his intentions were good, but I think it was a little flawed. If you look at it in an overall perspective, his intentions weren't bad at all. Like, I don't think Daniel's intentions were to like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna give money to everybody else and like not to like my own friends or whatever. Like, I think his intentions were good, but I think he had to see the overall picture of what was going on.
And what about Hosuh, the fellow founding member of DanPlan, who'd been there through the highs and lows? What did he say? Well, he hasn't made any official statements, any videos, released any DMs, but he has been streaming a fair bit with Steven, and even sought to make this comment.
Back in high school, Daniel was like a really good guy. I respected him, he was great. He knew like how to get along with people, but now he has somewhat changed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's enough.
That's good.
So
that's
people
good.
change, right?
Yeah. Okay.
People change, and depending on the circumstances and the factors, I could not foresee that. Like, people change.
What that means exactly, I'll let you decide. Another one of my friends, Darpina, also made a video on the topic that will be linked in the pinned comment below, which integrates interviews with some fresh perspective. I definitely recommend checking his take out if you have the chance. In the end, both sides have said their part, and we shouldn't expect more, but we can always do our best to understand. It does seem like a divorce, with the channel being torn between two rather determined figures, and although some people may take a strong side, a lot of people just seem confused and forlorn, with many coming back to these videos to pay their respects like a YouTube gravestone. It's sad that some people are just waiting for DanPlan to turn around and say it was a huge prank, because that's the degree that their perception was shattered. It's phenomenal. I'd say this topic reminded me of my spill video in a way, when I spoke about the corporatization of YouTube. In that upload, I noted that once you give the voice of a channel a personality, people become connected to that as a brand, and that voice has much more power in the future of the channel as the owner. Today's situation, although not identical, was a test of that, and regardless of who you side with, audience sentiment was clear. Steven established his character, and once people began to associate the characteristics with the name, the association reversed and people came back not just for the jokes or the banter, but for Steven, as much as they came back for Hosuh or Daniel, and that sentiment echoed throughout the drama. He wasn't just a member, he was the member, and the scale of this drama is a testament to that. DanPlan was a channel which was the passion project of its titular creators, a channel that brought joy unto many people and found great success thanks to its dynamic concepts and energetic interplay between its hosts. Its By the Way series, in a way, became synonymous with DanPlan. If By the Way went down, DanPlan was going to face a real challenge in its continuation. And with this new era, it seems Dan is attempting to reinvent the brand. But with the legacy of By the Way engraved in its identity, one thing is for certain, DanPlan will never be the same. I'd first of all like to give a thanks to a creator who I really have come to like by the name of Antoine. I caught one of his videos on DanPlan and I reached out to him and he was really helpful and provided me with a resource that I wouldn't have been able to use otherwise to make this video. So a massive thank you to Antoine. Go check out his channel. He's not making too many videos right now, but go and send him some love and appreciation. I think he's got a really good head on his shoulders and very nice technical style. I have nothing too much else to say about it. Just go and check him out, send him some love, send him some appreciation. Thank you, man. So, that was the video. What a video. But I feel really good. And I hope that came across. I hope this video sees the light of day eventually. Might take a while, but hell yeah. What a video. And I'm glad. And I hope you guys enjoyed it too. I got to give a big thanks to my editors. Once again, they really be out here on the front line, working the grind. Much respect to them. Keep up the great work. I would also like to thank my Patreons. My $10 Patreons plus will be up on the screen right now. I want to give a big thanks to my $50 Patreons. We have Amanda, we have Caroline, we have Hypercube, and we have some Hullabaloo. Thank you so much for your support. It means a lot. And we also have to give a big thanks to my $100 Patreons. And that is Brandon Junk, Christopher Carras, and Yesenia Ramirez. Thank you so much for your support, guys. It means the world to me. If you want to reach me, Twitter, but I've been quite busy recently, and obviously you can join my Discord. I must give you a warning. I haven't been using my Facebook recently, so there's my warning. I don't really have too much else to add. Hang in there, guys. I'm sending my love. Keep up the hustle, my friends.